Part 1. Prehistoric Masonry. Chapter 1. Tradition and History in Masonry. In the study of Freemasonry, there are two kinds of statements which are presented to the mind of the inquiring scholar, which are sometimes concurrent, but much oftener conflicting in their character. These are the historical and the traditional, each of which appertains to Freemasonry as we may consider it in a different aspect. The historical statement relates to the institution as we look at it from an exoteric or public point of view. The traditional refers only to its esoteric or secret character. So long as its traditional legends are confined to the ritual of the order, they are not appropriate subjects of historical inquiry. They have been invented by the makers of the rituals for symbolic purposes connected with the forms of initiation. Out of these myths of speculative masonry, its philosophy has been developed, and, as they are really to be considered as merely the expansion of a philosophic or speculative idea, they cannot properly be posited in the category of historical narratives. But in the published works of those who have written on the origin and progress of Masonry from its beginning to the present time, the legendary or traditional has too much been mingled with the historical element. The effect of this course has been, on adversely prejudiced minds, to weaken all claims of the institution to an historical existence. The doctrine of false in one thing, false in all, has been rigidly applied, and those statements of the Masonic historian which are really authentic have been doubted or rejected because in other portions of his narrative he has been too credulous. Borrowing the technical language of archaeology, I should say that the history of Masonry, footnote, in the progress of this work, I shall use the terms Masonry and Freemasonry without discrimination, except on special, and at the time specified, occasions. Borrowing the technical language of archaeology, I should say that the history of Masonry may be divided into two periods, the prehistoric and the historic. The former is traditional, the latter documentary. Each of these divisions must, in any historical inquiry, be clearly defined. There is also another division into esoteric and exoteric history. The first is exclusively within the arcana of the order, and cannot, as I have said, be the subject of historical investigation. The second properly comes within the sphere of historical study, and is subjected to all the laws of historical criticism. When we are treating of Freemasonry as one of the social organizations of the world, as one of those institutions which are the results of civilization and which have sprung up in the progress of society, and, finally, when we are considering what are the influences that the varying conditions of that society have produced upon it, and what influences it has reciprocally produced upon these varying conditions, we are then engaged in the solution of a historical problem, and we must pursue the inquiry in a historical method and not otherwise. We must discard all speculation because history deals only with facts. If we were treating the history of a nation, we should assert nothing of it as historical that could not be traced to and be verified by its written records. All that is conjectured of the events that may have occurred in the earlier period of such a nation, of which there is no record, in contemporaneous or immediately subsequent times, is properly thrown into the dim era of the prehistoric age. It forms no part of the authentic history of the nation, and can be dignified at its highest value with the title of historical speculation only, which claims no other credence than that which its plausibility or its probability commands. Now, the possibility or the probability that a certain event may have occurred in the early days of a nation's existence, but of which event there is no record, will be great or little, as dependent on certain other events which bear upon it, and which come within the era of its records. The event may have been possible, but not probable, and then but very little or no importance would be imputed to it, and it would at once be relegated to the category of myths. Or it may have been both possible and highly probable, and we may be then permitted to speculate upon it as something that had exerted an influence upon the primitive character or the subsequent progress of the nation. But even then, it would not altogether lose its mythical character. Whatever we might predicate of it would only be a plausible speculation. It would not be history, for that deals not in what may have been, but only in that which actually has been. The progress in these latter days of what are called the exact sciences has led, by the force of example and analogy, to a more critical examination of the facts, rather the so-called facts, of history. Voltaire said, in his Life of Charles XII of Sweden, that incredulity is the foundation of history. Years passed before the axiom in all its force was accepted by the learned, but at length it has been adopted as the rule of all historical criticism. To be credulous is now to be unphilosophical, and scholars accept nothing as history that cannot be demonstrated with almost mathematical certainty. Niebuhr began by shattering all faith in the story of Rhea, Sylvia, of Romulus and Remus, and of the maternal wolf, which, with many other incidents of the early Roman annals, were consigned by him to the region of the mythical. In later times, the patriotic heart of Switzerland has been made to mourn by the discovery that the story of Willem Tell and of the apple which he shot from the head of his son is nothing but a medieval fable, which was to be found in a great many other countries, and the circumstances of which, everywhere varying in details, still point to a common origin in some early symbolic myth. It is thus that many narratives, once accepted as veracious, have been, by careful criticism, eliminated from the domain of history, and such works as Goldsmith's histories of Greece and Rome are no longer deemed fitting textbooks for schools, where nothing but truth should be taught. The same rules of critical analysis which are pursued in the separation of what is true from what is false in the history of a nation should be applied to the determination of the character of all statements in Masonic history. This course, however, has, unhappily, not been generally pursued. Many of its legends are unquestionably founded, as I shall endeavor hereafter to show, on a historical basis, but quite as many, if not more, are made up out of a mixture of truth and fiction, the distinctive boundaries of which it is difficult to define, while a still greater number are altogether mythical, with no appreciable element of truth in their composition. And yet, for nearly 2 centuries, All of these three classes of Masonic legendary lore have been accepted by the great body of the fraternity without any discrimination as faithful narratives of undoubted truthfulness.